guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, upon request, I'm going to be doing a ball python care video. Before we get started, I just want to say though, I'm sorry for if the lighting or the video quality is not very good. It is currently very cloudy outside and I'm not sure how that's going to really affect the video. The other thing I want to say is that I now have an Instagram page and a Patreon page for this channel, so please make sure to check that out, follow me. And if you like to donate to Patreon, I'd love that. That would be great. All the money will be going towards the care of the animals, their food, their bedding, and anything else they need. In this care video, we're going to be going over 4 main topics: health, habitat, food, and heating. Those are the 4 main things that you need to know with your ball python. Now, we're going to start off with habitat. And when you have a habitat, a lot of people, if you only have one snake, you'll normally keep it in a glass container or a glass tank, and that is okay. It tends to lose heat a little more, and it's not as good for humidity if you do use that, but it's perfectly fine. You don't want to have a whole rack when you only have one snake. So, on the other hand though, if you do have a rack, that's great too, and it holds humidity a lot better. So what I'm going to start with is the size of your bin. Now, I know I've talked about this before in previous videos, but you want your bin, the short side and the long side combined, to be the length of your snake. It can be bigger too if you want, but you want it to be at least the length of your snake. Okay, so moving on to your substrate, you guys know that I normally use ReptiChips. There are a lot of different substrates out there that you can use. Like I said, you can use just plain paper, newspaper. I really don't recommend this though, as I just feel like it's not as nice as snake. It doesn't have as much enrichment. The other thing that is used is aspen fibers. However, that is not a good idea. Aspen fibers should be used more with snakes that are more like colubrids. They don't need as high of humidity as ball pythons, and they also like to burrow. So aspen's not really a good choice in my opinion. Some people use cocoa fibers or cocoa chips, and that's what I like the best, so I would go with that. It holds humidity really well. The only thing you have to be careful with, like I said in my last video, you can't let them get too wet and stay too wet, or it will start to grow mold, so you got to be careful with that. Speaking of growing mold or being just dirty overall, cleaning your substrate or your whole tank in total is definitely something you're going to need to do. However, being a snake, you really only have to do it once a month, or some people only do it once every 2 months. But you do want to make sure that you're always spot cleaning. So if they poop or something, or if they make a mess, you definitely clean that up right away to prevent any bacteria growth. So moving on to whatever else you can have in your tank, you always want to have at least 2 caves, one on the warm side and one on the cool side. When you have a cave, you want to have only one opening, and not those log caves. So one opening, and preferably small, but big enough that they can just get in it, because they like it being completely dark. Now this kind of doesn't apply if you have a snake rack that doesn't have see-through bins, because that's almost like a full-time cave for the snake, and really all they need is bedding and heat and a water bowl. So with my snakes and with most people's snakes, they'll have a clear see-through bin or tank, and in that case you do want to have 2 hides, one on the warm, one on the cold side, that can shut out the light as much as possible. You're also going to want to have a water bowl big enough for them to soak in. That will help if they have any shedding issues, or hopefully this will never happen, but if you have mites, that can help right in the beginning stages. They can soak in there and get those mites off a bit. So other than that, you can add other things in. Just make sure they're reptile safe, not pointy or ingestible. Ball pythons don't really climb. They're not an arboreal species, so they don't need a very tall tank. I forgot to say that earlier. And you don't need to add any like really tall branches in there, which you can. Some of them will like it, but it's not necessary. Okay, so I've been mentioning a lot about keeping your humidity right and how they need higher humidity, and they do. So they need at least 60% humidity, at least is what I do. And you don't have to be super careful with this. A lot of people are like, you need perfect humidity and you need it to be perfectly set at a perfectly percentage, and that's not true. You don't want it to get too wet where they're literally sitting in water, because that can cause scale rot or respiratory infections. and you don't want it to be too dry, especially when they're shedding, because that can cause them to have stuck shed. So you're gonna want to have it around 60%. And if you have a bin, like if you have a snake rack, then this is pretty easy to do, as they hold humidity a lot better. However, if you do have a tank, that can be harder, especially if it has a screen lid. You're just gonna want to make sure that you keep misting it once or twice a day if you do have a tank, and it would be a good idea to give your snake a humidity box. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later date. So, talking about heat, which is a main thing with the humidity, if you use a heat lamp, that tends to cause the humidity to evaporate a lot faster than if you use a heating pad. And I prefer using a heating pad anyways for ball pythons, as they don't like basking. Where they come from, they don't bask. They're asleep during the day and they're awake at night. So they don't really like a heat lamp as much as they like the belly heat of a heating pad or heat tape. So when using a heat pad or heating tape, you always want to have it hooked up to a thermostat, because there's been numerous instances where the heat pad, of course, can't regulate itself, so it overheats and it can unfortunately burn the snakes. Okay, so I recommend feeding your ball python once a week. That's the normal schedule for even a young ball python all the way up to older. Sometimes when they get older, you'll feed them once every 2 weeks, and I feel like they kind of just do that on their own. If they stop taking food every week, then you'll kind of just know, okay, maybe they just want to eat every other week. So that's one thing to watch for. The other thing is when feeding strikes. So ball pythons are known to be picky, and that can be hard. So there's a few other tricks. Maybe I'll do a video on that later, how to get picky eaters to eat. But you want to be careful with that you have their humidity and heat correct, or at least in the right ranges. Heat, I believe your warm side should be in between 88 and 91, and your cooler side should be 10 degrees below that. So that's what my bins are at, and that seems to be working well for them. That will help them eat too. If your humidity is good and your heat is good, then that's going to help them want to continue to eat. Okay, so our last topic is health, and I'm just going to be giving you some things to look for, some red flags, and you just should keep your eye on your snake at all times to make sure they're healthy. I take out my ball pythons all the time and I handle them. That's the other thing I should talk about actually. I handle them and I just check them over for anything. Now, when they're shedding, that's the thing. You want to be careful of stuck shed. Now, a lot of times it's not the biggest deal. You can give them a little bath, maybe let them raise their humidity a little, and they'll get that stuck shed right off. However, sometimes, especially on the tip of the tail, that's the most dangerous. They'll get maybe even layers of stuck shed, and that can actually cut off circulation for them, and that's not a good thing. I've heard many stories and seen in many instances when a snake will get stuck shed at the end of their tail, and it'll start turning black, and they basically just lose circulation in the back of their tail, and they actually have to get it amputated. Now, this can be dangerous though sometimes, because if it's not amputated, they tend to get an infection, and that can be very dangerous, and honestly, it's very life-threatening. The two other things that are like the main, most common things with snakes are respiratory infections, and that can come from, again, bad temperatures or bad humidity. And you can kind of tell when your snake has an RI. They'll start to breathe audibly, and you'll hear them almost whistling when they breathe, or you can also sometimes see spit or mucus coming out of their nose or their mouth. I also open my snakes' mouths once a month or so and check and make sure there's not any extra saliva or bubbles. If there is, I tend to, this really doesn't happen ever, I think it happened like once, I bump up their temperatures about 2-3 degrees, and same with their humidity, and that seems to kick it right out. You definitely don't want them to get a full-fledged RI infection, because that's like very contagious, and you need antibiotics for all your snakes, and that's just a whole pain. And then the other thing is mites. Now, mites, you don't tend to get mites just like your snake's not going to be like, oh, well, now I get mites. It tends to come from you touching or them being around other reptiles or other animals with mites, and then bringing them to them. And so if you touch another person's reptile who has mites, and then you come home and you touch your reptile, there is a chance that you may give your reptile mites, and you want to be careful with that. They're just a pain to get rid of as well. They just spread like wildfire through all your reptiles. I'm lucky enough I have not had that happen, and hopefully I never will. But it is common, and in that case, you want to give them definitely a bath with Dawn dish soap. Like just kind of like cover them in a very thin layer of Dawn dish soap and give them a bath. That helps slide the mites out, and that's like just the first step. You want to continue to do that, change their whole tank, make sure there's no mites in there. If it continues to get worse after a few days, you definitely want to take them to a vet. Oops, whoa. You definitely want to take them to a vet and get them checked out, and there will be other mite preventatives and mite treatments that you'll get, and you'll probably have to do with all your snakes. So just keep your eye out for those 3 main things. And the one other thing that I've kind of seen is them being underweight or overweight. Now, when feeding them, I didn't say this either. That's one big thing I cannot believe I missed. The size of their food. So you typically, if you're just kind of doing it the normal, easy way, and it really doesn't matter if it's not the perfect size. You want to take like the thickest part of their body and try to take a rat that is that thickness around. What I do to be more careful is I take my rats and I weigh them. I have a gram scale, and I'll weigh the snake, and I want my rats to be 10 to 15% of the body size of them. So say she's 100 grams, then I'll give her a 10-gram mouse. So that's basically how it works. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. Please excuse any mess ups that happened in this video. Today I just filmed very quickly and edited very quickly, as it's been a while since I posted. If I missed anything or you guys have any other questions, please just leave them down in the comments and I'll make sure to respond right away. And a quick thank you to Graham Cracker. I'll also have his channel's linked below. I actually did a video with him not too long ago, and you guys can go check that out and watch that. Make sure to check out my Instagram page and my Patreon page, and thank you so much for watching again.